Ladies and gentlemen, if you've ever stared at your phone, reading the same message over and over, wondering what they really meant, if you've ever felt your chest tighten because a reply took too long, if your mind has turned love into a battlefield of what ifs and worst case scenarios, this is for you. Overthinking is slowly stealing your peace, your confidence, and your joy in relationships. And the truth is, it's not because you care too much. It's because you're afraid to lose. In the next few moments, you are going to learn how to silence the noise, take your power back, and finally experience love without anxiety controlling every thought. Overthinking in a relationship doesn't begin because you care too much. It begins because you care deeply and you're afraid of losing something that matters. So let's get that straight first. You are not broken. You are not needy. You are not too much. You are a human being whose heart is invested. And when the heart is invested, the mind often tries to protect it by running scenarios, questions, and what ifs on an endless loop. The problem is, the mind thinks it's helping. But most of the time, it's quietly sabotaging your peace. Overthinking usually shows up as a desperate attempt for certainty. You want to know where you stand, how they feel, what they meant by that text, why they took longer to reply today, whether that tone meant something, whether that silence is a sign, whether you're about to be abandoned. And the more you try to solve the relationship like a puzzle in your head, the more disconnected you feel from the actual relationship happening in front of you. Because love is not built in your thoughts. It's built in your experiences. One of the biggest traps of overthinking is believing that if you just think hard enough, you'll finally feel secure. But security doesn't come from answers you force out of someone or conclusions you jump to at 2 a.m. Security comes from alignment between what someone says, what they do, and how you feel around them over time. Overthinking skips that process. It tries to fast forward trust without evidence, or it assumes danger without proof. Here's the hard truth. Your mind will always find something to worry about if you give it full control. Even in the healthiest relationship, there will be pauses, misunderstandings, off days, moments of distance. Overthinking turns normal human behavior into a personal threat. It takes neutral moments and paints them with fear. And fear is persuasive. It feels real. But feeling real doesn't mean being true. A powerful shift happens when you stop asking, what are they thinking? And start asking, how do I feel when I'm with them? Not how you feel when you're alone replaying conversations, not how you feel when you're imagining the future, but how you feel in the actual moments you share. Do you feel respected? Do you feel calm more often than anxious? Do you feel like you can be yourself, or are you constantly performing to be chosen? Overthinking pulls you away from your intuition. Grounding yourself in your lived experience brings you back to it. Another reason overthinking takes over is because you've made the relationship the center of your emotional world. When someone becomes your main source of validation, happiness, and stability, your mind will cling to them like a life raft. Every small shift feels massive. Every change feels dangerous. That's why stopping overthinking is not just about calming your thoughts. It's about expanding your life. When you have purpose, friendships, goals, routines, and joy outside of your relationship, your mind doesn't panic every time the relationship breathes. You also have to recognize the difference between intuition and anxiety. Intuition is calm, clear, and consistent. It doesn't scream, it doesn't spiral, it doesn't show up as 10 different thoughts arguing with each other. Anxiety is loud, repetitive, urgent, and exhausting. Overthinking often disguises anxiety as intuition, telling you that if you don't act now, ask now, clarify now, you'll lose everything. But real connection doesn't require you to chase certainty every moment. It grows in space, trust, and time. One of the most freeing things you can do is stop trying to control the outcome. Overthinking is control in disguise. It's the belief that if you analyze enough, prepare enough, anticipate enough, you can prevent pain. But love is not safe because it is controlled. Love is meaningful because it is chosen freely, again and again. You cannot think someone into choosing you. You can only show up as your best self and observe whether they meet you there. This is where self-trust becomes everything. When you trust yourself, you stop overthinking because you know that no matter what happens, you will handle it. You stop scanning for signs of disaster because you believe in your ability to respond, not your ability to predict. You don't need guarantees when you know you'll be okay either way. That confidence quiets the mind in a way reassurance never can. Another key is learning to sit with uncertainty without trying to fill it with stories. Silence doesn't always mean disinterest. A delayed reply doesn't always mean rejection. A change in tone doesn't always mean loss. Sometimes it just means life. Overthinking assigns meaning too quickly. Peace comes from allowing space before interpretation, from letting things unfold before deciding what they mean about you. You also need to be honest about whether overthinking is trying to tell you something important or just repeating an old pattern. Sometimes your mind is loud because your needs aren't being met. Sometimes you're overthinking because you're ignoring your boundaries, settling for inconsistency, or hoping potential will replace reality. In those moments, the solution isn't to think less, it's to listen more clearly and act with self-respect. Calm doesn't come from staying in situations that confuse you. It comes from choosing environments that support your emotional safety. Communication matters, but overthinking often turns communication into interrogation. Instead of expressing how you feel, you look for proof. Instead of sharing vulnerability, you seek reassurance. Real connection happens when you say, "This is how I feel," not "Tell me I'm wrong to feel this way." When you speak from honesty rather than fear, you free yourself from the mental loop. Letting go of overthinking also means letting go of the idea that love should always feel intense. Calm can feel unfamiliar if you're used to chaos. Peace can feel boring if you've mistaken anxiety for passion. Sometimes the mind overthinks because it doesn't recognize stability as love. Learning to sit in calm without creating problems is a skill, and like any skill, it takes practice. You don't stop overthinking overnight. You interrupt it, you notice it, you question it, you choose presence over projection. You bring your attention back to what you can control, your actions, your boundaries, your self-worth. Every time you stop feeding the spiral and choose grounding instead, you reclaim a little more peace. And slowly, something changes. The relationship stops living only in your head and starts living in real moments again. You breathe easier. You show up more authentically. You stop shrinking yourself to avoid loss and start expanding into who you truly are. Overthinking fades not because you forced it away, but because you no longer need it to feel safe. And when you no longer need it to feel safe, you begin to experience something powerful, emotional freedom. Freedom doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop gripping so tightly out of fear. You allow connection to breathe. You allow yourself to be present without constantly scanning for danger. This is where love becomes lig, HTR. Not because it's less meaningful, but because it's no longer weighed down by constant mental pressure. One of the most important realizations you can have is that your thoughts are not commands. Just because a thought appears doesn't mean it deserves your belief or your energy. Overthinking thrives when every thought is treated like an emergency. But most thoughts are just noise. They're echoes of past experiences, old wounds, or stories you learned long before this relationship even existed. Learning to observe your thoughts instead of obeying them is a turning point. You can say, "I notice I'm spiraling," without asking yourself to solve the spiral. Often, overthinking is fueled by an old fear of abandonment, a fear that if you relax, if you stop monitoring every detail, something will slip away. But love that requires constant vigilance is not love that brings peace. Healthy connection doesn't demand that you be on guard all the time. It invites you to trust, not blindly, but wisely. Trust doesn't mean ignoring red flags. It means not inventing them when they're not there. You also have to accept that no relationship will ever give you 100% certainty. Even the strongest partnerships involve risk. The moment you decide to care about someone, you accept that there is no absolute control over the outcome. Overthinking is often an attempt to escape this reality. But the irony is that the more you try to control love, the more anxious you become. Letting go of control isn't giving up, it's choosing peace over illusion. There's a subtle confidence that grows when you stop overthinking. It's the confidence of knowing you don't need to be perfect to be loved. You don't need to say the right thing every time, respond at the perfect moment, or analyze every interaction. When you believe you are enough as you are, the mind quiets, not because nothing could go wrong, but because you know your worth doesn't disappear if it does. Another powerful shift happens when you stop taking everything personally. Not every change in mood is about you. Not every quiet moment is a sign of withdrawal. People bring their own stress, history, and emotional patterns into relationships. Overthinking assumes responsibility for things that don't belong to you. Releasing that burden gives you space to be compassionate without being self-critical. You also begin to realize that reassurance has limits. No amount of constant checking, questioning, or validation can replace self-soothing. If your calm depends entirely on someone else's responses, you'll always feel unstable. Learning to regulate your own emotions, to comfort yourself when uncertainty arises, is one of the most empowering skills you can develop. It turns moments of anxiety into opportunities for growth instead of panic. Sometimes stopping overthinking means allowing yourself to feel discomfort without reacting immediately. Silence doesn't need to be filled right away. Confusion doesn't need instant clarity. Emotions can exist without action. When you give yourself permission to pause, you often find that the urge to overthink passes on its own. What felt unbearable becomes manageable when you don't fight it. You may also notice that overthinking lessens when you become more honest with yourself about what you truly want. Ambiguity is easier to tolerate when you're clear on your standards. When you know what consistency, respect, and effort look like to you, you don't need to analyze every detail. You simply observe whether the relationship aligns. Clarity replaces chaos when your values are solid. There's a quiet strength in choosing not to chase reassurance. When you resist the impulse to seek constant confirmation, you send a message to yourself that you can handle uncertainty, that you don't need to beg for peace. This doesn't mean suppressing your needs. It means expressing them from a place of calm confidence instead of fear-driven urgency. As overthinking fades, presence grows. You start listening more deeply instead of planning your next question. You enjoy moments without dissecting them. You laugh without wondering what it means. You connect without calculating outcomes. This presence is attractive, not because it's strategic, but because it's genuine. People feel it when you're truly there, not trapped in your head. You may still have moments where old patterns resurface. That doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're human. Growth is not the absence of anxious thoughts. It's the ability to respond to them differently. Each time you choose grounding over spiraling, trust over fear, self-respect over self-doubt, you reinforce a new way of relating. Over time, you begin to realize that the goal was never to stop caring deeply. The goal was to care without losing yourself, to love without abandoning your own peace, to invest without becoming consumed. This balance is what allows relationships to thrive without draining you. And perhaps the most freeing realization of all is this: you don't need to be constantly chosen to feel worthy. You are worthy before the relationship, during it, and regardless of how it unfolds. When that truth settles in, overthinking loses its power, because the mind no longer believes that every unanswered question threatens your value.